Hey people, this is a story I found on Wikipedia from history, and it's about a black prince slash nobleman who was enslaved in Mississippi. So I'm going to read off this website, which will give you his life story. Abdul Rahman Ibrahim of Suri was born in 1762, son of Suri the Almani, or king of the Fulbe, a predominantly Muslim population of cattle herders that ruled the West African country of Fouta Djallon, an area now part of the Republic of Guinea, from his family's traditional seat in Timbo, a town of airy, large-roomed houses surrounded by hedges and dominated by a large mosque. Economically, the Ful were traders acquiring salt and European manufactured goods in exchange for the products of Fulbe craftsmen, in exchange too for slaves, members of rival tribes defeated in battle. As a prince, Abdul Rahman received a traditional Muslim education, beginning with learning to read and write passages from the Quran. His aptitude for his studies persuaded his father to send him abroad for further education, first to Messina in what is now Mali, then to Timbuktu, where he studied not only Islam but also geography, astronomy, calculations, and the law. At 17, Abdul Rahman returned to Timbo, entered the army, and quickly rose to the rank of commander. It was during this period that Ibrahima met a white person for the first time, John Coates Cox, a marooned Irish ship surgeon who was found ill and insect bitten and brought to Suri, who provided shelter and care until Cox regained his health and returned to Ireland. It was also during this period that Abdul Rahman married and fathered his first child, a son. In 1787, Suri dispatched Abdul Rahman, then in his late 20s, at the head of an army of 2,000 to confront rival tribes, then fronted the commerce of which the Ful depended. The campaign went well at first, with Abdul Rahman's army advancing easily against only scattered opposition. Flushed with apparent success, Abdul Rahman Ibrahima sent his infantry home, retained only a detachment of 300 horsemen. The enemy, however, had not fled, but merely returned to a more strategically advantageous position. As Abdul Rahman and his cavalry entered the narrow mountain pass, they were engulfed in a hailstorm of gunfire. By the time Rahman escaped the pass and reached the summit, he faced the enemy virtually alone. In short order, he was overwhelmed, stripped, bound, and walked barefoot 100 miles, trailing behind his own horse. In March of 1788, just 3 months after he had left Timbo as a commander of a powerful army, Ibrahima Rahman and 160 other men were marched into the river-running brig Africa, manacled and led below deck to belong the long journey to slavery down the Gambia River and across the Atlantic. After a transatlantic voyage of 3,000 miles, the Africa made landfall in tiny Dominica in the Windward Islands at the foot of the Caribbean Sea. There, Rahman and 56 others from the Africa's human cargo was sold for $4,090, less than $72 each, and transferred to the cargo hold of another ship, the Navarro, for a 2,600-mile journey across the Caribbean Sea to the Yucatan Channel, then north to Spanish-ruled New Orleans, and up the Mississippi to the river town of Natchez. In Natchez, 6,000 miles from Timbo, 8 miles from his reign as a prince, Abdul Rahman reached the end of his commandeered journey. Natchez today is a river city of less than 20,000, trading on its plantation mountains and antebellum charm. But the settlement Abdul Rahman first saw in August of 1788 was a collection of 20 houses, an old earth and wood fort, a handful of taverns and stores to service tobacco planters who lived inland along the creeks that fed the Mississippi. Floor planters examined the African captives on auction there on August Saturday in 1788, but only one of them, Thomas Foster, could pay cash. He purchased Abdul Rahman and Sambo, a fellow Ful soldier who had served under Abdul Rahman's command. The two men were secured with rope and led to Foster's land in the Pine Ridge area, 6 miles from Natchez. Thomas Foster was 29, the same age as Abdul Rahman, a tobacco farmer with a wife and 3 children working 1,000 acres. Home was a 50-year-old blockhouse, little more than a hut. As the daughter later remembered, he had the entire family, including Foster and his mother, lived in a single room. The rude building sat in the only 5 acres that had been fenced. This land was the Abdul Rahman's home for the next 40 years. A series of incidents quickly demonstrated to Abdul Rahman the depth of his fall and the bleakness of the future he faced. Upon arriving at Foster's land, Abdul Rahman, probably communicating through another African from a neighboring plantation, offered Foster a ransom for his freedom, a common strategy in West Africa, but an outlandish suggestion on the Mississippi River. The offer was rejected out of hand. Further indignities awaited him. In Fouta Djallon, Abdul Rahman's long plaited hair had been a symbol of distinction. The plaits were immediately cut, though Abdul Rahman struggled so hard that he had to be tied to a tree. He was then confined to a shed for 3 days to teach him submission. He was released to gather the tobacco crop, the kind of labor that in his kingdom would be performed by people far below Abdul Rahman's caste and royal breeding. He refused to go in the fields, and this time only whipping overcame his defiance. In due time, he managed to escape, slipping out of his bed one night, crossing the fields and entering the trackless woods that lay beyond. Patrols were mustered but failed to find him. Sadly, he had not been in the New World long enough to know where to flee to find his freedom, or whether indeed freedom was available to Africans anywhere on the new continent. Suicide was foreclosed to him by his Muslim faith. After several weeks in the forest, Abdul Rahman returned to the Foster's plantation. Escape solved nothing. Not only his faith would give him the strength to accept his situation as a will of God, as a test which he must endure and prevail. Battle captured the Middle Passage from Africa to Dominica to New Orleans, and Natchez from the auction block to attack. That's not related. Now it slowed. Henceforth, his life would be measured not in hours, days, and weeks, but in years and decades. Outside the Foster plantation, the world moved on. In Futa Jalon, Abdul Rahman's father died and was succeeded as an Almani by his second son, Sadhu. 7 years later, Sadhu was killed in a coup. That same year, 1795, Spain ceded the Natchez district to the United States, where it became part of the Mississippi Territory. At this point in time, that part of Mississippi and a lot of lower Alabama and Florida was called East Florida and was held by Spain. The new territory, with its agriculture and economy and slavery, joined America's rapidly expanding western regions, helping to develop America's economy. Its benefits and growing pains would no longer be Spain's, but America's. On Thomas Foster's Pine Ridge plantation, later known as Foster's Fields, Abdul Rahman slowly pieced together a new life, albeit one of a slave. After his early escape attempt, he sank into being a common slave, as an acquaintance of his later life put it. Although farming had been considered declass for full soldiers, not to mention full royalty, Abdul Rahman became primarily a farmhand, working crops he was familiar with, from Futa, Jalon, tobacco, cotton, coffee, and indigo, and tending farm animals. On occasion, he distinguished himself, even now drawing on his experience as a leader and soldier, becoming in time to the groom to Foster's racing horses, and gradually rising in the plantation hierarchy. He accepted his condition in other ways as well. Although he had left behind in America a wife and child, in time he married a recently acquired woman, Isabella, a Christian. Abdul Rahman did not convert to Christianity, rather he maintained his Muslim faith. Without a Quran, without pen or paper, he maintained his literacy in Arabic by tracing figures in the sand. And he maintained a temperate life with his industrial character, tolerance, and obedience to the will of God that had been the cornerstones in his Muslim education and upbringing in Futa Jalon. And I just want to take a moment to comment here. This is a bit like when Malcolm X had to be educated when he was in jail. There's a long history of African Americans and Africans taking the time when they were being punished to learn or in suffering and gain knowledge and keep the knowledge inside them keep going. And no amount of time is ever lost. These qualities, his intelligence, experience, and self-discipline, served him and his purchaser as well. Foster switched from tobacco to cotton, expanded his acreage, and became one of the area's most prosperous planters. His original complement of free adult slaves grew to 10 by 1795, 20 in 1800, 40 in 1810, 70 by 1818, and more than 100 in 1819. Abdul Rahman's status improved too, raising him to a position of authority on the plantation. As a result, Foster granted Abdul Rahman small but important privileges. He enjoyed freedom of worship. He tended the small garden and sold the excess in Natchez, keeping the proceeds. His family grew to 9. His place in the periphery of the cash economy, his skill with the crops, and his acknowledged position on the Foster plantation made him a familiar figure in Natchez on weekends. Nor was his experience unique. Scholars of remote enslaved people of Muslim faith were especially well equipped to survive slavery's ubiquitous cruelty and oppression. There is ample evidence, says Dr. Sylvian Diouf, author of Servants of Allah, that Muslims actively used their cultural and social background and the formation they had received in Africa as tools to improve their condition in the Americas. Despite his capacity to adapt to the life he was forced to lead, even the relative privileges granted and success he achieved, Rahman still bore the stigmata of slavery. From the day his hair was cut, he ceased caring for it, and it grew coarse and tangled. His skin became weathered and dry. A friend of long standing recalled that over the course of their long acquaintance, he had not once seen Rahman smile. In 1807, a weekend trip into Natchez changed Abdul Rahman's life forever. While selling his produce by the road, he saw a familiar-looking white man in the streets. After a moment's hesitation, the man asked where in Africa Rahman came from. When he replied that he was from Timbo, the man asked whether his name was Abdul Rahman. It was Dr. John Cox, the Irish ship surgeon who marooned in Africa in the early 1770s, had been nursed back to health in Timbo by Abdul Rahman and his father. The two embraced and went to Cox's room where Rahman recounted a story of what had happened over the past 2 decades. Together they went to the plantation to talk to Foster. Cox asked Foster to name a purchase price for Abdul Rahman. When Foster refused, Cox stated his own price and raised it in a one-sided bidding until it reached $1,000, almost twice the market price for a male slave at the Natchez slave auctions. Foster still refused. The auction price could not come close to the value that Rahman had added to the Foster fortune. Again, this is another thing I want to add. People keep saying that Africans were enslaved and they were taught civilization, but here we're shown that the slaves were more valuable than anything that they could have themselves. You know, Rahman's expertise was more important than anything on the farm. Without him, he was the key to the success of that farm. And relating this onward to another thing, where they keep saying in South Africa, who will run the farms if the Dutch farmers go? Again, they were successful at farming long before the Dutch ever turned up. Anyway, moving back, although Cox was unsuccessful in buying Rahman's freedom, the two continued to see each other frequently over the years. Cox settled in Natchez. Periodically, he renewed his offer to Foster, although it was always refused. Although friendship ended with Cox's death in 1816, Cox's son continued his father's efforts to gain Rahman's manumission. By the time of Cox's death, Rahman's relationship with the doctor, combined with his royal lineage and the tale of his dramatic escape and return, made him a figure of some prominence in Natchez, and his circle of acquaintances widened. One newly acquired friend was Andrew Marchuk, a New York-born printer who had come to Mississippi with the army in 1798. Marchuk and Rahman may have met as early as 1803. Their relationship deepened over the years. In letters to friends, Marchuk extolled Rahman's virtues. In 1821, Rahman was in Marchuk's printing office, where he saw a book of a type of specimens, one of which was Arabic. It was the first Arabic Rahman had seen since leaving Futa Jalon, and he quickly copied it and translated it into English. He told Marchuk that he wished to write to his home country. After 40 years of slavery, events moved quickly. Once Abdul Rahman wrote his letter home and gave it to publisher Andrew Marchuk in 1826, Marchuk wrote a cover letter and gave it and Rahman's statement to Mississippi Senator Thomas Reed, who would then forward them to Secretary of State Henry Clay. Clay then sent the documents to the U.S. consul in Tangier, Morocco, who presented the case to the vizier of Morocco, Sultan Abdul el-Rahman II. The Sultan's favorable response was duly returned to Clay. He read and passed it to President John Quincy Adams, who approved the purchase of Abdul Rahman from his owner. Adams' decision was duly sent to Marchuk, who then approached Thomas Foster. By this time, one of Natchez's wealthiest, most influential panders. For 20 years, Foster had refused to sell this valuable slave at any price. By 1827, however, Rahman was well into his 60s, and his economic value to Foster was considerably diminished. Foster now told Marchuk that if means were found by which Rahman could return to Africa, he would be released without payment. But one condition was demanded. He was only willing to release Rahman if he would leave the United States. Marchuk relayed these terms to Henry Clay, who replied in February of 1828, "There is no difficulty in acceding to the conditions presented by Mr. Foster. You will please to send Prince to Washington for the purpose of him being transported to his native country." On February the 22nd, less than a month after receiving Clay's letter, Foster and Rahman rode into Natchez, and Foster deeded the slave in trust to Marchuk. The 40 years of Rahman's slavery were indeed over, but now he faced perhaps his biggest challenge: how to free his family. A local fundraiser on his behalf helped obtain the money to buy the freedom of his wife, Isabella, in less than 24 hours. But where to find the money to free 9 more? 40 years before this, Abdul Rahman had traveled up the Mississippi to Natchez in the hold of a schooner. On April 8, 1828, he headed upriver again, this time in the cabin of a steamboat, a transportational marvel invented during his years of bondage. His ultimate destination was Africa, as Marchuk and Clay had promised Foster, but Rahman had his own priorities. For him, a more important obligation took precedence over the agreement among Foster, Marchuk, and Clay. The obligation to redeem his children from slavery trumped everything. Redemption cost money. Abdul Rahman was going up the Mississippi to find a way to secure the necessary funds. He steamed first to Louisville, then to Cincinnati. From Cincinnati, he headed north onto the Ohio River to Wheeling, Virginia, then by stagecoach to Baltimore along the route now followed by Interstate 68. At each stop, he called on town leaders, giving them letters of introduction penned by Marchuk. More than once, he walked the streets soliciting contributions. In the 8 months while the heat of a presidential election rose around him, Abdul Rahman raised $3,000, money that ultimately freed all but one of his children. In Baltimore, he met Henry Clay, who was busy campaigning for president in the election. Clay